Hello, Jörg here with another episode of the Coachpreneur podcast, a podcast all about coaching, where coaching transforms leaders, organizations, and life. Today I'm with Farhaz, and we have met quite a while ago. Basically, our coaching journey started pretty much the same because we attended the same course, but I think we are going to talk about that later. First, I would like you to introduce yourself, Farhaz. Who are you?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you, York, for getting me onto your program and to your podcast. My name is Farhaz Farouk. I'm a Sri Lankan. I was born in Sri Lanka, but a bit of a weird one. I spent about two-thirds of my life outside the country. Yeah, I grew up in Saudi Arabia. My parents moved there when we were little and got back to Sri Lanka to finish secondary education. And of course, I qualified in Sri Lanka. A little bit about that later. And then once I finished qualifying as an accountant, I moved to Bahrain to work. And I spent most of my life in Bahrain. Got back about 5 years back. So I am more a foreigner in my own country than the local. But married to a lovely lady. She's also a professional banker. And we have almost known each other also for maybe the last 30, 35 years as well. And yeah, I'm back in Sri Lanka now. I finished off my professional life and I was looking for something new to do. And that's when I thought of moving out of my profession as an accountant, as a bank, into the wonderful world of coaching. So that's the long and short of me, Jorg.
Thank you for sharing a bit of you. I didn't know that you grew up in Saudi Arabia. Me being a German now for about 20 years in Indonesia, it's interesting how leaving your home country changes you, but also maybe opens your mind. At least that's true for me. And that has always contributed to my ability to coach, maybe. So, how does your experience of living abroad and then coming back to Sri Lanka has influenced your coaching?
A bit, I must say, Jorg. As I said earlier, I grew up in Saudi Arabia and not to a Sri Lankan school, but to an Indian school. So from a very young age, my parents started exposing us to different cultures. And if you think about India as a country, it's just not like one homogeneous setup. Within India itself, it's multicultural. So in my class, there were people all the way from north of India to the south of India. And of course, us Sri Lankans, we had other nationalities as well. So that opened my eyes into being open to cultures, different religions, different languages, and in a way broaden my scope. Of course, coming back to Sri Lanka, I studied and I finished off my studies. I qualified as an accountant and I joined a leading firm of accountants. If you will permit me to say the name, I was with KPMG in Sri Lanka for my initial training. And within KPMG also, because it's such a large firm, we had staff from all over Sri Lanka. Plus, because we had representative offices in other countries as well, there were some Maldivian staff also within the Colombo office. We used to get visiting staff from other offices as well. So there again, I was exposed to different cultures, different ways of thinking, and so on. So that's the kind of exposure that I was open to. So your putting all of this together has actually made me a more wholesome coach, I would say. When I sit in front of someone and I start doing the initial discussions, I am somehow able to connect with the person regardless of what background they have come from, mainly because I have been open to working with people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different languages, and different lines of thinking. And in a way, it has helped me tremendously, I must say, York. And I do see that when I speak to my clients and when I see the feedback and when I see their responses, I also see how they seem to be able to ease into the process and start beginning trusting me almost from day one, because they somehow feel that I'm very open to what they're talking about. One very good case in point, I was dealing with a client from Singapore. And this was an online client, obviously, because it's Singapore. I was based in Sri Lanka. And literally on the first meeting, the person opened up so much to such an extent, it even brought about an emotional response from the client. I don't want to get into specifics, and I too was surprised. It's just day one, and if the client can trust me so much, there must be something that's happening that's working for the client and perhaps for me as well. And I think being abroad for most of my life has helped me grow.
Yeah, what I assume, bringing my own perspective, is that when you have seen a very diverse people, so to say, of backgrounds, of beliefs, of cultural imprint, I'm assuming it helps you to see the human and not the label.
Yeah, I think that's probably a very good way of putting it. I'm able to see the human and not the label. That's lovely. That's very strong. That's
And
probably.
what I see for myself is that I can be very open to individuals, so being non-judgmental to their beliefs, their behavior, sometimes, let's say, how they dress, for example, or how they show up, because I know that our upbringing, our cultural imprint, the communities we are interacting with is basically influencing many of the things, right? Who we are, how we behave, and for me, that's random, right? It's by chance. So meaning by chance, I'm born in Germany, and then I happen to live now in Indonesia. That's to me also to a certain extent by chance, not necessarily planned. And when I take this into consideration, it really helps me to be with a person in a non-judgmental way. Where I struggle sometimes still is when I look at the factors or the communities or the societies who are creating that, being non-judgmental towards these societies. I'm getting better at that, but for the individual, I can be with whoever sits in front of me. How is that for you?
I too have the ability to somehow ignore or not consider too strongly the outward appearance, because I also firmly believe in looking through that and actually talking to the person in the within the persona rather than the outside itself. I don't judge people based on how they are dressed, how they look. I used to when I was a kid, when I was a lot younger, but my experiences have taught me that none of these things should matter. And if you'll permit me, I'll just tell you one short story. My first trip to Turkey, myself and my wife, and we have this very habit of just getting into public transport and going on random rides. We just get to the station and we say, we want the ticket to the last stop. And in one such thing, we got into a tram and the two of us were standing. It was a bit of a crowded time at the time, rush hour. And just where we were standing, there were two young gentlemen. I actually use the word gentleman with all responsibility, who had tattoos all over the place and with an earring. It's not the typical personification of the word gentleman. And I didn't care. We were just standing there. And then I observed the two of them just turn to each other and had a chat with each other. And they don't have a smile. They were like really very strong, poker faced. And I was thinking to myself, maybe trouble brewing. This was my initial reaction. It was quite some time back. So I naturally got my protective, instinctive thing working. And all of a sudden, both of them stood up. Right? I thought, okay, now that's trouble. And then, I don't know, they said something in their language and then they said, sit.
Yeah.
And then, so I asked my wife to sit. I sat down and then both of them smiled, shook my hand. They just hanged around. So later on, I figured what they thought was, okay, there are two people who seem to be older than us, and we probably should offer them the seat. And they seem to be foreigners as well, so let us be hospitable. And so they stood up and they offered their seat. My initial reaction was, these are hooligans. But then when I saw what they did, was amazing. A couple of halls later, they once again said, they saluted, they said salam, and then they just hopped off the train. And that left a lasting impression. Never, ever judge a person by the way they look or by our perceptions,
Yes.
presumptions. Rather, always give the person the benefit of the doubt, have that initial interaction, and then we come to a conclusion or a judgment as to who they truly are. Today, whenever I see people with tattoos, I actually remember those two young gentlemen, and I no longer fear people with looking that way because they're just human beings. And with the right interactions, they are probably going to treat you just like they would anybody else in a very respectable and humbling manner.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think that's the bias we have, right? And we need to admit everybody has a bias, right? And our brain is always a judgment machine, right? Because without judgment, we would not survive. So we need to sense what we are getting into. Is there trouble or not? And I remember a similar thing when my flight once was delayed, and then a group of men showed up and they looked like the Taliban. And because of the Western projection and I was in Malaysia, and because of the Western projection of the Taliban immediately, right? So you have this kind of strange feeling. And then one of these guys came to sit next to me. And I really had a lovely conversation with that person during the flight. And it's a father, a husband. And why was he dressed like a Taliban? Yeah, because he was studying in Hyderabad. No, not in Hyderabad, in somewhere in Pakistan, actually. And that's how the people dress there, right? And he was Indonesian, so meaning he just adjusted to how people are dressed in that area. And I also wear sometimes batik shirts. Right? In Indonesia, we wear batik.
Yeah.
And I think that's something which is really relevant for coaching, not just for us as coaches, but also the realizations our clients sometimes have is that how they perceive the world is shaped by many factors, and our biases are getting into the way, right? And then it changes the dynamics. Yeah.
Sure does. It sure does.
Really powerful.
I guess one important skill that we should be developing is the ability to keep our biases to a side when we are talking to our clients, because you never know what they are coming with and what background they are from, and none of those should matter. What matters is whether the client can end up better as a result of speaking to us.
Exactly. And it's part of the ICF Code of Ethics, right? So International Coaching Federation has a code of ethics, and it's explicitly stated there that we accept the client as who they are and need to be non-judgmental and respect them for being human, so to say. And I think so you just mentioned Bahrain, and of course, as we speak, there is a lot of trouble going on in that region. And I personally believe that we as humans have a responsibility to respect each other, because fundamentally we are all the same. Of course, we are different in certain aspects, but what differentiates us is a defining aspect. You mentioned the diverse communities you have lived in and interacted with and worked with. And for me, the same, right? So I go to events, and then there's Russians and Ukrainians and Americans and Iranians, and we all get along, right? Because it's fundamentally humans get along. But maybe don't turn into a political debate. I want to touch on one aspect before we maybe continue on the coaching. When I got to know you, you were in your CEO role. We were attending the same coaching course. What stood out for me was that you are a Toastmaster, right? You explain more what Toastmaster is. How has being a Toastmaster, and at a very high level, so you always win competitions, if I'm not mistaken, how does this help you as a coach?
So first off, what is Toastmasters? It's a global organization. It's over 100 years old, and it is the organization's objective is to help us build confidence using the platform of public speaking. But it's just not about public speaking. There's also leadership training that happens within that, owing to the way the organization works. So it's an organization that helps us with communication and leadership. That's how we generally think of Toastmasters. It improved the way I communicate with people. It improved the way I sound, the way I appear, the way I articulate, the way I enunciate, and so on. Even the way I use my face, my hands, all these little things which sometimes we ignore and for an untrained eye may not seem important, but it is. These things, these finer points got honed in me. Of course, the ability to speak and so on. But more importantly, writing skills improved dramatically. Editing skills improved a lot. The ability to structure my thoughts and convey them to others improved. My general day-to-day behavior with people improved. And these are all the hidden benefits of being a Toastmaster. And I could transfer those skills to not just being a coach, but just being a human being, just being a business partner, a friend, a colleague, whatever role we play, all of these could be transferred in. As an example, there's this friendly fruit seller outside near my place. He's got a cart and he comes in. He's a good friend of mine now. And generally, having the ability to converse with people in a meaningful way has opened the doors for me to actually even strike a conversation and look at commonalities between somebody who's just a random person on the street, like this gentleman. So those are the skills that Toastmasters actually taught me, and I'm bringing those into my coaching. One place that I remember very memorable thing was I was at an interview. This was after going through a series of interviews, and this was almost the final one. The interviewer just told me, listen, really happy to have met you and all of that. Please tell me 3 good reasons why I should hire you, and you have 2 minutes. That was the question. This was like the make or break. And to me, as I heard this, I was thinking to myself, this is very familiar. In Toastmasters, we call this table topics. Impromptu speaking. There's this concept called table topics in Toastmasters where you speak for 2 minutes on a topic that you're not prepared for. So I was thinking to myself, hey, this is just a table topic, just something I do every day in my club. So I responded, of course, in a meaningful way. I gave 3 very good reasons and with a call to action to this gentleman because I know he's the decision maker. And I got the job. So you see, sometimes in situations where you least expect it, these skills can be used. So yeah, it's helped me quite a bit. And I use it day in, day out. In my currently now as a coach, I also do some training. I also do some teaching now because I've got an interest in academia as well now. And I'm using all those skills, and it's proved absolutely useful and absolutely beneficial. My background as an accountant, as an investment professional, as a finance professional, as a management professional also helped quite a bit. And having the skill of being able to structure thoughts, bring it all together and communicate, and having that background has probably made me a better coach, I must say. And in a way, developing the coaching skills now, I see that putting all of these together, I can actually give better value to my clients, to people who speak with. So yeah, anything that we do in the past, in my case, it's Toastmasters, it's my background and my experience. But perhaps it could be a person who's been a professional football player, somebody who's been an executive chef, somebody who's been a civil engineer. Everyone comes with knowledge, comes with experience, comes with skills, and all of those potentially can be transferred into becoming a good coach. So I think that's probably the real takeaway from this.
You make me smile. I'm affiliated with the International Coaching Federation. I'm in the leadership team. And then we have several programs. So sometimes peer-to-peer coaching, mentoring, And of course, we have our events. I'm deeply involved in the coaching ecosystem and community. And so many coaches feel that they are not good enough or not there yet because they just started coaching. And I think it's very powerful what you just shared, that who you are, the experiences you have, the professional background, the personal challenges, that all is relevant for being a coach. And I remember when I started coaching, I met a young coach who was in his early 20s, I think 24 when I met him the first time. And he was coaching CEOs. And he shared the story that the first CEO he met, he walked in and he was hired by HR. And then he walked into the office and the CEO said, "Who are you?" And he said, "Oh, I'm your coach." And then the CEO said, "Oh, but how come you can coach me? You're so young, right?" And then he said, "Okay, but why don't we have just a conversation and then we decide if we move on or not, right?" And then they continued. And it's the interesting thing is in coaching, you're not the expert. And I had that also in one of the previous episodes I recorded. We were talking on that not being the expert is actually the coaching stance, right? We don't know, but we are curious. But of course, our background, our personal experience, our education influences who we are as a coach and how we coach, right? I think we met about 4 years back the first time. And that's the beauty of also observing other coaches, to realize there is not one way, and that whoever is coaching, there is always a benefit or a value for the client. And like many roads lead to Rome, different ways of coaching create benefits and big value. So what was the key defining moment that got you into coaching? Was there something which was a trigger?
It's an interesting path that led me to coaching, really. I was a professional right throughout my life, accounting, investment, finance, banking. Then I got into management. Something felt like, am I going to do this in the long haul? And in any case, in my mind, and both in my mind and my wife's mind, we had always had this little thing in our heads. By the time we get to 50, we should more or less retire from full time work, having this regimented way of living life and all that, and then take things a bit easy. So, in preparation for this, I had always had one of my eyes on academia, on teaching, training, and so on. This has always been there. Coming back to Sri Lanka from Bahrain, I came back for work, but a few months into it, and luckily or unluckily, COVID happened. I wasn't really sitting and working. It was mostly over the internet and Zoom calls and what have you. Something started triggering back again. Is this something I really want to continue to do? And that's when one thing led to another, and I met an old friend of mine, and that person was running a small training institute. He said, "Hey, I'm setting something up. Can you come and help me in the initial phase?" It was not really a full-time thing, but more like a consulting thing. So I went in, helped the person set it up, and from that work, I got introduced through an intermediary to Morphosis coaching. And at that time, I didn't really know there was something called coaching. I was thinking coaching, mentoring, training, tutoring, it's all the same thing. Somebody comes and teaches you what to do and so on. But having got introduced to Morphosis coaching and to the founder, Jean-Francois, I started learning and understanding that coaching is actually something different. It's a profession by itself, requiring its own skills. And as you rightly pointed out, a coach is not an expert. He's just the facilitator, somebody who questions everything, is very curious. And I was thinking to myself, hey, that's something I probably can try and do. Let me try to see if I can learn. And that's when I got into first program in coaching. And of course, that's where I had the privilege and honor of meeting yourself as well in that first program. And I had never looked back ever since. Went through that first program, and then we also went through the second program together, and then we went through the third program together. And it has been one heck of a ride. Learning from each other, learning from our guru, of course. We learn from each other, and then of course we learn from performing, from doing. And as you rightly mentioned, just like you have the ICF network in Indonesia, I've got the ICF network here in Sri Lanka. I started associating myself with those people there. So that broadened my scope. And that's how I ended up in coaching. So in a way, you could say it was almost by accident, but maybe not. Maybe I was always destined to be here.
Yeah, interesting. So the pandemic did a lot of things. Actually, the number of coaches has significantly increased. For me, it was flying blind, and I thought I need to listen better in order to read between the lines. So certain coaching practices or skills I already practiced as a leader. But yeah, I felt I needed to sharpen that. And after doing it for a while, hey, that's actually where my passion is. And then I basically got out of my corporate role. You mentioned academia before. And maybe first of all, I need to congratulate you because you just graduated from your master in professional coaching and entrepreneurship. And I know that you also signed up for an even higher level. Now you're working on a PhD. I'm curious how the academic aspect, so doing a master, helped you as a coach?
So, yeah, first of all, congratulations to you too for completing the same master's degree. So we did that together.
We celebrate here.
Yeah, so I had an MBA from earlier from my previous life as a management professional. So that grounding was there. And yeah, it's a progression from the MBA that I went ahead with the doctorate, and it's actually a DBA. I'm doing the doctorate in business administration, which is a more industry focused doctorate than a PhD. PhD is highly academic. So that's outside. But getting to the masters in professional coaching that we recently completed, I found that in the past, where we were getting ourselves ready for the ICF certifications, it was a very practical approach to coaching. Of course, we learned what ICF is about, its code of ethics, its code of conduct, and what coaching as a profession is and what it isn't, and so on. But what we probably were lacking is the academic aspect of it. It's the literature aspect of it. It's what has been written by various people. And the master's degree actually gave me an opportunity to complement the practical knowledge that we gained gaining the ICF certification. It gave me an opportunity to complement this with the academic aspect of it, reading what other people have written about coaching as a profession. Also, it gave me an opportunity to test out the learnings from an academic and a practical point of view with live case studies. Because the paper that we had to submit at the end of the program, was based on a live case study. And it helped me quite a bit because there was knowledge scattered all over the place. That was one. Also, the master's degree that we did had an entrepreneurship component. So being a coach is one thing, but how are we able to bring that together and make it into a successful business as an entrepreneur is a different set of skills, needs a different set of skills. And this program helped bridge that gap. Yes, as a coach, we always have this internal struggle. Whilst we like to help people and so on, we also need to make a living. And how do we balance the two? This program actually opened my eyes to that. We can still go about helping people whilst at the same time also bringing it together and making a living for ourselves, a means of living for ourselves as well. And you see, your doing this master's degree helped amalgamate all the body of knowledge from practical point of view and academic point of view. Plus, it also helped me to convert this into a successful business idea and building that as well. So that's where it really helped. And I really am happy that I got into it. I was initially struggling. Should I do it? Should I not do it? What value it's going to add? But now that I have done it, I see the immense value it has added in the way I think about things, in the way I look at things, and in the way I bring everything together. So it's been a good decision.
Happy to hear. So for me, it was transformational, I would say, because besides the aspects you mentioned, bringing in the academic or the book or the body of knowledge from a different angle, because it is a reflective practice, we had to write a reflective report. So I learned so much about myself, not just about my coaching and my entrepreneurial journey and what is working and where I get into my way or where I maybe need to improve or shift the focus. But actually what it did to me is unpeel, I don't know, 1 or 2 or 3 more layers of self-discovery and understanding patterns I have from a different, deeper level, right? So for me, it was really, really interesting. And at 1 or 2 points, I remember it was also getting really emotional because I realized something which I thought I already understood, but then something new showed up and I was thinking, wow, where's this coming from? That's coming out of nowhere. But now I understand even more why I tend to behave in certain ways. And then I don't want to just leave it like a general statement here. So for me, the challenge has always been in my coaching and also from an entrepreneur perspective that I don't want to be pushy. Giving the space and allowing the time from a client's perspective to coach someone. Okay, the client is not ready yet, right? So be with that. It's a process and at some kind it will surface when the client is ready. And also on the entrepreneurial side, rather than being, let's say, pushy to sign up new clients, being with the client and engage in several conversations over the course of time or following up over time, and then basically having the client when the client is ready. What I've realized is that this is actually a disservice because as a coach, if we are in the service of the client, and as an entrepreneur, we are also in the service of a potential client. So if the life circumstances of a client doesn't improve because we are holding back, right? Or if we cannot allow the potential client to make a decision that coaching will change their lives, right? We are basically doing a disservice. And what I've realized is why I was holding back. And of course, many of the things which happen to us or how we behave is rooted in our past, childhood, and whatever. And I already thought I already have dismantled certain aspects of my childhood and overcome that. And here it is. So upon reflection, I realized, wow, there is one more thing. And since I did my master, it has changed the way I'm with clients, right? Where I'm becoming a little bit more determined in pushing the client more out of the comfort zone, right? Of course, as coaches, we need to push the client out of the comfort zone because learning and awareness only helps when you're leaving the comfort zone. But not being afraid anymore by myself, based on my past experiences, that I might overstep. Right? It was basically a projection of, okay, I don't want to be pushed, so I don't push others. And that was really detrimental for me from a reflective practice perspective. And I don't think that I would have discovered that if I wouldn't have been forced to really spend so much time in reflection on the coaching and on the entrepreneurial side, and also the integration of both, right? Because they are all correlated. And the pattern you have here, a pattern you also have there. And then, of course, this pattern maybe shows up in other circumstances of your life. And that was really something I didn't expect. So that's maybe the biggest takeaway from me from this program, how it helps me to understand myself better and let go of things which are not serving me and also not serving, of course, then my clients. We haven't talked about clients yet. So who are your clients?
So for any coach, I guess the biggest challenge is clients. Because without clients, you don't have any work. The way I have structured myself is I have three different categories of clients. The first one is plain and simple individuals who are quote unquote looking to figure things out. That's one set. Then I have corporates, companies that hire my services for their staff. So I don't really directly deal with the clients or the coaches from inception. It's rather the companies, and then the companies say, hey, listen, my so and so needs a coach. These are the metrics, these are the parameters, this is what we would like, and so on. And then in the middle, there are those who are not just having individual kind of problems, but more professional in nature. Those who would like to, they say, listen, this is the appraisal that I got. I don't know how I can move forward from here, that kind of a question. Or I have been stuck in this role for the past 5 years and I'm finding it difficult to break through and get to the next level. So that kind. So that's how I categorize my clients. And what I do in addition to these, of course, because Sri Lanka is a country with a number of people who aren't necessarily well endowed when it comes to finances, I also offer a bit of, from a CSR point of view, I also offer a deeply discounted rate sometimes for people who I think may benefit from my program, but who aren't necessarily able to afford the commercial rates that I charge any of these three categories. And I do that. Of course, those are on and off. And guess what? I have found that doing that has made me a better coach, number one. Number two, has opened doors to future business through referral by these people. And that I find has been like the payback for me when I do offer this on a more of a CSR basis and so on. Those are the three main commercial categories. And then I have a CSR category, which pays back in different ways. And that's how I split it up. Now, how do I find these clients? I do not actively market on any platform. I usually get most of my clients through referrals. Even the corporate clients that have signed me up, I have got through referrals. So I'm happy with that for the time being. But increasingly, I have been toying with the idea of actively marketing myself on LinkedIn specifically. And I have started in a small way trying to do a bit of marketing on LinkedIn. So fingers crossed, waiting to see how that will pan out. I am happy with the funnel that I have, with the client flow that I currently have, but let's see how the LinkedIn initiatives will take me. And
Yeah. So there's always room for development. So maybe to be a little bit more specific, you mentioned before you have been a CEO, you have been coaching within your organization as a CEO, which is maybe very uncommon to have a CEO coaching within their own organization. So basically you have the background from being a corporate leader, you have the background of being an internal coach, and then basically taking care of people within your organization by means of coaching. Now, when you work with companies or when companies reach out to you, what are they exactly looking for? So basically, what are the topics you are coaching or you are helping on?
there was one particular back office kind of a role that I was coaching, and that coachee actually needed communications to be developed because that was where things were messing up. I felt the conflicts and not being able to resolve conflicts and not being able to communicate the company's point of view to counterparties and so on. So therefore, that needed communication. The requirements for companies are quite varied. So, for instance, the same company might allocate me two of their staff members, and both of them having two different sets of development needs. And that is my experience. I can't really pinpoint and say it's this, but more often than not, it's got to do with either based on their profession, it's either a communication matter or it's a matter of organizing themselves. You can probably put it into these two, but you can't pinpoint. For instance, if it is more of a client facing role that I'm coaching, then they would like me to emphasize or work with the team member on their communication aspects and so on. Whereas if it's like a more of a back office kind of a role, it's more about getting themselves organized and so on. So as you may guess, there isn't really like a one size fits all. And it's always good for us to go with an open mind, as you have already mentioned earlier in the podcast. Whenever we meet new coaches, just because the person comes from say sales doesn't necessarily mean they will need only to talk to people. It could possibly be something else and so on. I usually go with an open mind.
Yeah. I can relate to that. The problem which is presented as a coaching trigger, so to say, is almost always not the thing that actually surfaces then as a real coaching topic. And I can clearly relate to communication being a key aspect. And you mentioned conflict. So I don't know about Sri Lanka, different culture than here in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, but here by all means we avoid conflict. And interestingly, now I'm running a lot of conflict management workshops with a coaching angle because as per my understanding and my experience, a conflict or the difficult conversations or the tension is always individual, right? So what I perceive as tension, you just maybe shrug off, and what I perceive as a conflict, maybe for you is already Armageddon, yeah. So because our different personalities and cultural imprints, that's why communication, language, how we contribute to the dynamics from a leadership perspective, but also from a staff level perspective, from a sales perspective, how do we close a deal, so to say, and our customer service, how do we deal with the dynamics, is always very individual. And that's basically where the power of coaching is, on top of mentoring and training, right? Because you can do communication training, you can do mentoring, which is then expertise, experience based. But fundamentally, it's all the individual challenges to communication. And telling somebody to do something differently doesn't necessarily work, right? And I can relate that it's difficult maybe to frame it. When do you hire a coach? But communication, collaboration within organizations is definitely something. Conflict as well, right? I had a client who wanted to coach a high performer, but because of being a high performer, causing a lot of collateral damage. And it's not on purpose, it's not intentional. I like sports analogies. If I can run a marathon in, let's say, 4 hours, I will lose everybody who is able to run the marathon at 6 hours, and I will be dropped by somebody who can run it in 3 hours. Yeah. And that then creates the tension and frustration if the expectation is that everybody crosses the finish line at the same time. Okay, so corporate companies and then individual clients struggling. Individual clients struggling with what?
Well, generally, individual clients' struggles are very personal in nature. I found occasionally people having family issues, having issues with, I don't know how to manage people. I have issues with my timing. I'm like really stressed out over certain things. In fact, occasionally there have been also people who think they need a coach, but then as we discuss, I find out that they don't really need a coach. They need some other kind of professional help, like maybe perhaps psychiatric evaluation or counseling or whatever, which I'm not trained to do, and so on. So it's very interesting. And as a coach, we got to keep an open mind and also look for these little red flags which coaching cannot sort out. And we should have it in ourselves and in our hearts to point them in the right direction and send out. So, yeah, individuals come with all kinds of issues. And usually the first meeting is spent on trying to figure out whether this is actually a coaching problem, a problem that needs a coach, or the intervention of some other professionals, in which case I try my best to help them out by introducing them to the right professional. As we all coaches know, the solutions lie within the coach's thinking, but it's just that they're so overwhelmed with the problem. They just need that little bit of a help and a little bit of a nudge and questioning to help them figure it out themselves. So that's usually what happens.
The scenarios you mentioned for me point into the direction of avoidance often, right? So what do we avoid? Where setting boundaries and also communication, of course, right? So what conversations do we have? Or back to avoidance, we don't have. And yeah, that's highly individual. So is there any particular success story you want to share?
Success story from point of view of a client or from a
From a
person?
client perspective.
Yeah, certainly. I'll pick a corporate client. In fact, two of them went through a very structured program. It was supposed to be 8 sessions. And in fact, for one of them, by the time we got to the sixth session, there was already very good improvement. And both of them, in fact, wrote back to me a few months later. Both of them had successfully worked through the issues with the organization, and both of them successfully got promoted as well to the next level. So to me, that was a bit of a pat on my back as well. But more than that, a reflection on how well the coaching sessions actually went and how the coaches were able to apply what they have figured out to their real lives and convert that into true success. And those have been two good success stories. In fact, both of them were from the same corporate client. So in a way, I have a good big green tick with that particular corporate client as well. So that worked out well for me.
Yeah, happy to hear. Happy clients is always good. And you mentioned before, your main source of clients is referral. And referrals only come if you do a good job, right? Because nobody hires a bad coach or a bad plumber or a bad hairdresser, right?
The inverse also works. If you do a bad job, that's it. So
Exactly, right?
bad
It goes
referrals.
both
Oh,
ways.
don't go to him. He's just.
Is there any topic you would like to discuss or bring up which we haven't talked or touched on yet?
Yeah, maybe something that we had a passing comment, but we never really touched on that even in my one of my former lives as a CEO. As you rightly said, I was also coaching my team, and to me, that is an absolutely important thing for anybody occupying leadership positions. Lots of people in leadership positions are faced with situations where they need to sit and coach their team, they need to sit and mentor their team, they need to sit and guide their team. Coaching skills, to me, are an absolutely important set of skills any person in a leadership position should have. Reason being, not always does the leader have solutions to particular operational issues. Time and again, more than the person seated in the top seat, it's the operational staff who know a lot more about a particular role. It's just that they are so overwhelmed or they are so blinded by day to day routine, they are not able to see through what they are doing. So if the person seated at the top has coaching skills and is able to arouse curiosity, ask the right questions, and help the team figure a better way of doing things, then obviously the organization prospers and everybody is happy. Those skills are absolutely imperative. Whenever I speak to leaders, I try to convince them coaching skills are an absolute necessity when it comes to occupying a leadership position. Just not to acquire new qualification and say, hey, I got ICF certified, but the ability to use those skills in your day-to-day work will mean a world of difference to the way you can actually run an organization. I found that in my tenure as both CFO and as CEO, I used to do coaching without actually knowing it was coaching. But now that I know what coaching is, in a way, it has validated what I did in the past, and it has also given me a set of tools so that I can tell those who are currently in those positions who I'm coaching now that this could be potentially the benefit for them. So, yeah, that's something I would like to touch on. For leaders, coaching skills are an absolute, a beautiful part of your armory, and it will be good if you can acquire those skills.
I cannot agree more. And looking back at myself, if I would have known, I would have done it 20 years back. It would have changed a lot, both from an impact perspective I make on others and for the organization, but more importantly, the impact on me, because when we need to solution, when we need to be the expert, it doesn't scale, right? So as a leader, it doesn't scale. Coaching allows you to scale because you enable and truly empower your team members or other stakeholders or participants in the organization. And that's quite liberating. And since I've discovered coaching, as you mentioned, also beyond some kind of skills, but as a profession, and then so understanding that it's more than just active listening, powerful questions, or whatever we maybe apply as leaders before, I have influenced quite a few leaders to take a coaching course, right? Take a coaching education. Most of them are still in their CEO, C-suite, or senior leadership role. Everybody says it has changed the way they lead. It had made a significant impact on them personally from a self-discovery or personal development and growth perspective. And the impact goes beyond the organizational and corporate world. It also impacts their personal life in positive ways, right? So also family, kid relationships, things like that. So I can concur to what you were saying. Coaching, unfortunately, is totally underrated and often left out when we look at leadership skills, right? So training is, of course, a given, right? As a leader, you train, especially at the beginning, because we all come from an expert career. So that's naturally when we train. Then when we have teams, then we facilitate team dynamics. So facilitation skills are there to a certain extent. Then because we are experts and we have experience, mentoring shows up, but coaching is left alone. And don't wait too long. So don't wait until you turn 50 or 40. So maybe get into coaching education when you are in your mid-20s or something, because it benefits your whole life, right? So thanks for bringing that up. That's a good contribution to the conversation we are having. Anything else which comes to your mind?
Off the top of my head, maybe we can save some for a version 2 of the podcast.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, I will get back to you in a year or so and see how it has been also with your academic development. Farhaz, how can people find you?
I am, of course, on LinkedIn. I'm on all the social medias, but LinkedIn is where I am mostly spending my time on. Obviously, because it's a professional network. So I am on LinkedIn, and it's my name. So if you look for Farhaz Farouk, you'll find me on LinkedIn, or on Facebook, and maybe on Twitter and Instagram as well. But LinkedIn is where you can find me.
Okay, so I'll share the contact information in the show notes. Your name is already on the screen, so basically everybody knows how to spell your name. Maybe one more thing, while Farhaz is based in Sri Lanka, you are coaching internationally, right? Because with online we can coach, and as you shared at the very beginning of the session, you have a very diverse background and experience working with different cultures, nationalities. So that's definitely something where people can benefit from. And you have a diverse career or an interesting career development where you bring in a lot of walks of life into your coaching. Farhaz, thank you for this very enjoyable and insightful conversation. I wish you all the best for your personal life, for your coaching practice, and also for your academic development and endeavors. It was good talking to you. Thank you very much and have a good time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, York, for having me. I enjoyed the time here, and I wish you all the very best on a personal basis, as well as success for the podcast and this initiative that you're doing. See you around.
Yeah, thank you.